It's Radio Free 501c, the voice of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on all your favorite podcast services. This week, I welcome first-time guest Daniel Elacqua of Strategico Consultants and Gwen Garrison of High Sierra Insights. We have a robust discussion about data governance, stewardship, and storytelling. Welcome to episode 190. Hey everybody, it's Monday, April 3rd. That means it's time for another episode of Radio Free 501c, the voice of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips, and I want to thank you for joining us this week. To our global audience, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. And again, thanks for joining us. This week, we're discussing data governance and why it's important and how to manage it. But first, I'd like to introduce my first-time guest, Gwen Garrison and Daniel Elacqua, and I'm going to let them tell you about themselves. But welcome, Gwen. Welcome, Daniel. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself and say hello to our audience?
Sure. So I'm Daniel Elacqua. I have been in associations and around associations actually my entire life. One of those rarities that actually grew up in the association world. And I have, when I got into my own career, I found my path down the technology section of associations. And for the last several years, have been IT director, CIO of many associations. And as of last year, started my own consulting firm, Strategico Consultants. And one of the things that we focus on is helping our customers make better use of technology, including through making better use of their data.
Oh, excellent. Well, that is a great summary. And you're right, you are that rare unicorn in the association world. You don't meet people who grew up in it very often. So that is great to hear. Gwen, would you like to say hello and tell us about yourself?
Thanks, Cecilia. So my day job primarily is that I'm a clinical faculty member at Claremont Graduate University in Southern California. And I direct a program in graduate education that focuses on educational evaluation and data analysis. One of the hallmarks of that program is a one-of-a-kind course that is not taught anywhere else, is on data management and governance, meant to really capitalize on my own experience in the association world and in the education world on data management and governance of the data so that we can tell high quality data stories and actually use the data to tell the best source of truth within the systems itself. And I have my own nonprofit, I should say, I have my own consulting firm called High Sierra Insights, where I do both evaluation and I work on data management and governance projects, mostly related to folks who are working on BI, business intelligence, and when it falls over. And so what do they do then? And folks find me and say, hey, can you help us kind of untie this, figure out how to get our data in the right queue and get it telling the right kind of stories for our businesses. So I'm glad to be keeping myself relevant in the world of nonprofit and also being able to have the luxury of working with terrific students who are up and coming workforce in this area.
Wow, that is fantastic. Well, and you definitely have a very full schedule, it sounds like. So we definitely have the two right people here today for this conversation. So this ought to be fun. And if you're a data nerd like myself, I am just ready to jump in and get started. So Daniel, could you start us off by explaining what is meant by data governance?
Sure. So to understand what data governance is, we first need to understand what the end result is. And the end result really are the dashboards that we use to understand information about our products and services that we offer to our members. So a lot of times we implement these wonderful dashboards and then we look and we say, we don't think it's telling us the right thing. we're not sure that the data behind it is correct. Well, data governance is actually the processes and procedures of managing the data in the back end to make sure that when it does reach your dashboards, it is correct and accurate.
So, Gwen, would you like to add any thoughts on that? Has Daniel covered everything? It sounds like he has.
Well, what I would add is, why is it important and why is it such a hot button issue now, and especially for the executive group and the executive team? And what we have learned is kind of two things that have been happening. One is executive behavior has relied on its volume of experience to actually make and execute on decisions. And with data coming at us, with the world changing so rapidly, that's no longer a place of confidence for many executives. They need to have data coming to them quicker, faster, more robust than just relying on their professional gut that this is the right way to move the association. And that becomes really important as a governance, because it's about your people and it's about the policies that are involved in order to make all that system work. So it's a hot button topic now, and it's right for executives to get their heads around it and be able to bring the data together to help support their decision-making needs.
And that brings me back to Daniel's comment about dashboards. I think we talk a lot about dashboards, but I don't know if a lot of nonprofit organizations actually have them and use them. And I think, well, it's a bit crass for the high level conversation you two are bringing to us this week. But, there's that old saying about data, crap in, crap out. So, if you have bad, dirty, or out of date data, your dashboard isn't going to be helpful to you. So I think that is having those dashboards available, I think, is job one, building on what Gwen said. So Daniel, back to you. What are some tips for having quality data? How can we make sure that data is as clean as possible and used correctly?
So I would actually disagree. Having dashboards is not job one. That's job two. Job one is making sure that the data is clean and accurate. And really, there are 6 different buckets. If we think of data governance, and it's a very broad topic, but we can break it down into 6 different buckets. Management is really what is our where is our data going wrong? So removing the duplicates, correcting incorrect data, filling in missing data. That leads to data quality, which is really where we're looking and saying, is our data clean and reliable? And how is this data going to help us long-term? We also have to look at the ecology, right? How are all of our systems connected together? Many times we have these islands of data that are out there that are not connected to our primary data source, that even if we wanted to, we couldn't feed it into a dashboard. And then there's the standards, policies, and procedures, security, that all play into it too. And all this really plays into a much larger bucket, which is culture. And creating a culture of good data habits and good data governance. Yes. Data governance is not the role of one particular person or one particular role. It is the role of everybody in the organization who touches your data.
Could you say that again? Because that is actually the most important thing, in my opinion.
Sure. So data governance is not the role of one particular individual or role within the organization. It is the role of every single person within the organization who touches your data. They need to be trained on your data, your policies and procedures. They need to understand how data is feeding into the system and what is appropriate maintenance of that data. And they need to be able to point out when something is wrong with the data, and they need to feel empowered to really own their piece of the data.
Yes, empowered. I love that. And I asked Daniel to repeat that, everyone, because that is the most important thing. And we have to make sure that that data is owned by everyone, it is handled correctly and consistently by everyone, and that everyone does feel empowered to make a change. And you don't feel like you have to submit some ticket or a form or something to some data department or the membership department or the IT department to get that data updated. And also, I would like to say, bold move disagreeing with the host, Daniel, but I like that person. No, because you're right. You're right. I was wrong. The data is the first job one. That's the most important thing. And then how you pull it out, however you pull it out, would then be the next step. So thank you for that. So Gwen, what are your thoughts on this point of the conversation?
So what I'd like to do is build on what Daniel was saying about who owns the data in your organization. And we've moved to a different metaphor rather than just ownership, and that is owned by everyone, but that we have stewards of the data. So an IT can't play the steward role for everything. So we need to have the membership steward. It's somebody who's on the ground, understands how it's collected, how it's interfacing, how it needs to be moved to other parts of the organization, such as event management, and making sure members have a clean and good experience participating in an event, registering for an event, because the association knows who they are. So we have this kind of joint collaboration that needs to happen between IT and the business side, which allows them to have operational stewards over each of those data points. And that really helps build this ownership, this sense of culture, because people know that, hey, they're not just throwing it over the wall to IT. They actually are able to say, no, I really know what's supposed to be happening with this data, and IT needs to learn that. So one of the things that I have had the sincere pleasure with is having met Daniel, working in this kind of capacity. And now we're not doing these kind of joint consultancies together where we're bringing the IT kinds of expertise alongside with my evaluation storytelling expertise from the data to actually help both of us show how this all comes together and improve organizations.
I want to explore that point you just made about the story that the data tells, because that is what data is for. It is to inform us or educate us or tell us something. So could you expand on that a little bit, Gwen, about the storytelling aspect of the data?
So I think one of the things that is so important for associations is to know who their members are. Mm-hmm. And many of them struggle with maybe 5, 7, 10 different membership categories. And so if you were to ask them, well, how many members do we have? The membership people goes, well, in which category do you want that? And so we have to figure out, okay, so to answer the general question, we want to roll up all that information. But then if we want to know how to reach certain kinds of members, and we want to deliver products, say, to brand new members who are not acquainted with your association, you need to have flags onto that information. And so the sales department can actually work with it, or the engagement department can actually work with it at that point. So we need to be able to zoom out on data and zoom in on data. And it is our questions that drive that kind of process that then we start hooking all of this up. And we can tell the stories that actually can inform our decisions.
And I think that is what also ultimately informs member personas, which is another approach that we've adopted in the community over the last 5 or 10 years or so, where we kind of paint a picture of who that member in that specific category might be and what their interests and what their needs are. And I think one of my greatest frustrations is that people just look at the numbers. Like you just said, Gwen, is like, well, how many members do we have? Well, that's not really telling us anything. Then you start talking about member engagement, and then other people say, well, but then engagement, how are you defining engagement? But the point being, it's not how many members you have, it's how many members are actually getting something out of the member experience. And you can only know that if you have clean data that's used consistently, that's actually looked at in the format of what is it telling us? What is the story behind the data? And as a consultant who does a lot of research for my clients, I'm usually telling them a story. I'm not telling them, well, 8 out of 10 people like your group or 8 out of 10 people don't like your group. I tell them the story about, well, here's what we think they're saying. This is what we think this is telling you. And it's got nothing to do with how many members you have. Because like one of my favorite examples is if I have 2 members and now I have 4 members, I can say I just increased my membership by 50%. I just doubled my membership. I still only have 4 members. That's not telling me anything when I say that. So, but before we dig in a little deeper on the story and the background of data and membership, what is it actually telling us for our leadership decision making? Daniel, I'm going to bring it back to you because you made a very good point about keeping that data clean and empowering people. And then Gwen started to tell us about the concept of the stewards of the data. But what are some tips that you might have, Daniel, about creating those guidelines, creating that clean quality data? What are some things people can do to create their own data governance system?
Sure. So in a lot of ways, it goes back to understanding the data that you have. And if we think of our data in terms of quarks, islands, and dirt, with quarks, I know it's a very strange way to think about it. But
I'm sorry, but before you go on, are you saying a quirk, Q-U-I-R-K, or a quark, like in Lewis Carroll?
Q-U-I-R-K.
Okay, a quirk. Okay.
A quirk.
For our global audience, a quirk is like a quirky characteristic. It's something unusual. Thank you, Daniel.
Which, in terms of data, that would be the things that make our data unique, that are unique to our members. It might be a specific demographic. It might be how we categorize them. Or it might be that we know that John pays his membership 3 months late every year, and we're going to just allow him to do that and not drop his membership or call him before we do. The islands are really those pieces of data that are separate. That are the spreadsheet that somebody downloaded 10 years ago that they've been working off of ever since, that's on their personal computer that we know about, but it's not integrated in with our main database. And then the dirt, those are the really the bad things, right? That's the unclean data, the duplicate records. So once we understand all of those, then we can start to put together the plan of how to move forward. How do we address those quirks? Do they need to be addressed? How do we bring those islands into the fold and really make them part of our data ecosphere? And then how do we tackle that dirt? Whether it be through deduping or going out and surveying our members to fill in missing pieces of information, or even deleting data that maybe we collected 10 years ago because we needed it for one little thing and we've never used it since. So it's really about understanding your ecosphere before creating a plan.
Wow. I have never heard it called ecosphere before. I love that. I love that because it is the ecology in which you are functioning. And it is important. It is where the data lives. So, I love that. So, Gwen, what are your thoughts on that?
So, I think where I want to pick up at where Daniel left off is that these data that have these unique characteristics, they begin to tell stories in relationship to something else. So let's go back to the membership for the moment. One of the things many associations experienced was the drop-off in membership during the pandemic. And so seeing a line of not only what the membership is now, but what was it pre-pandemic? And then what was our sales the pre-pandemic? And it's very interesting, for instance, as associations pivoted, they moved up webinars because we could do webinars. And so before they didn't have many of those, the production went into place and they began to gain some traction in that particular area. Now they have to work about how are we sustaining all of this stuff along the way. So what I'm bringing in there is as we think about the unique characteristics, it's about those unique products and services that define the organization that we want to build those stories around, both the good stories, but also the stories where there's actually room to improve. And let me go tie that one more back to membership one more time. So if they lost members during the pandemic, so building on Daniel's example of that, John always pays his membership dues 3 months late, so why do we harass him? It's reaching out to those people now and saying, hi, we know you were a member before. We want to let you know what's happening now so that you can return to us to be part of a member. We think you're a valuable member of our community going forward. And having then and connecting the right messages that allow us then to create the actions we want to take on behalf of the organization. So it does start with the data. And then we create information out of that data. That's the trend lines, the sense making, the visual displays. But ultimately, what we want to do is drive that towards actions, internal actions that will hopefully increase revenue and decrease risk or decrease our expenses.
Ooh, decrease risk. Tell us more. How does data governance decrease risk?
One of the things that has happened in the last 2 years is that many associations have gone to a global audience as a part of the pandemic, but they are unaware of data privacy laws that actually, if they have members from that country in their databases, they're governed by their data privacy laws. So they need to be able to get up to speed on those. So that introduces risks. Now they have a member whom is not a U.S. citizen, but they actually have responsibilities and obligations because of privacy laws that new member comes from. So it's a new risk that many of our associations have not been prepared for. And that is a governance issue. It's the IT people can't do anything about privacy until they know how the association wants to handle it and how they want to handle members coming from countries like Japan and Brazil who have greatly expanded their privacy protections.
Wow. Okay.
I would actually add to that a lot of associations think that those policies don't apply to them because they only have U.S. members. But in reality, just because I live in the U.S. doesn't mean I'm not a member of one of those other nations that do have these more strict privacy rules. So it's important that we do pay attention to some of these other laws that are coming out of Japan and Brazil and the EU.
I think that's an excellent point because since we do have the global membership, as Gwen mentioned, we do have to be aware of that because if you're going to have a member from the European Union, you do have to follow all those laws. I think the one that always comes to my mind is the right to be forgotten, which I think applies to everything. It's not just search engines. I have the right to be forgotten by you. If I don't want to be a member anymore, I'm retired, just wipe out my record. So that's a question, though, speaking of wiping out records. I'd love to hear, and let's start with Daniel. I'd love to hear your opinion about it, because you were mentioning there's records we need to get rid of. We just don't need them anymore. There's deduping, but there's just some stuff we don't need anymore. What's your take on keeping records for deceased members?
Interesting question. I would ask, what value does that information bring to our organization? Mm-hmm. And I would ask that not just of deceased members, but of all of our data. Why do we have this piece of data? What value is this data to the organization, and why are we keeping it? And that's really when I'm working with clients and we start to walk through an AMS migration. That's the first question I ask is, okay, we pulled 96,000 records out of your old database. Are we going to import all 96,000 into your new database? Because junk in, junk out. Right. Or Can we go back 5 years and draw a line in the sand, or 10 years and draw a line in the sand? Can we define what an active member is and maybe draw a line in the sand there? So it's really, what value does that data bring to you? What question are you going to ask of that data that you need that data for?
That is an excellent point, because I do think it's like when you're moving from your old house to your new house, do you necessarily want to bring everything that you've been stuffing in the closets for the last 20 years? I don't think enough organizations think that way about their data. I think they hang on to it and just keep it forever. One of the most distressing things I would find when I was on staff and I'd open a member record is most of it was blank. And even though there were note sections, you could write all kinds of things like, oh, I talked to so-and-so today and they wanted to buy this book. I made sure they got the member price or something like that. In my take on deceased members is we would keep that record. When I was a membership director, we had guidelines, and we would keep that record and just mark it deceased in several places, because we just wanted to know. It was a way, in a professional society with individual members, I think it's sort of a way to memorialize that person's activity with your group. But it also really helps when the dead person calls you a couple weeks later and says, why am I in the in memoriam list? I'm not dead. So that actually happened to me when I worked at a membership group. And I said, oh, well, somebody called and told us you died. And he said, well, obviously they were wrong. And I know that guy is an idiot. So fortunately, because I had kept his record, I was able to just turn it back on, and I gave him, a year of membership to apologize, I extended it. But so that's one reason to keep the dead records for at least 6 months, because they may call you back.
Let me add another scenario from, I'm principally trained as a social scientist. So one of the things that we see that is so valuable coming off of old membership records that are stored in a data warehouse, that's the appropriate place. They shouldn't be floating around any longer in your operational warehouses, your operational storage sites. What they become very valuable, especially if you know certain characteristics about that member. And you get to tell a story with your organization. And for example, the biggest and hottest job right now is being a data scientist. But it turns out, if you roll that back, accountants were our first data scientists, because they always kept the forensic records and understood how the organization's bottom line ebbed and flowed through time and season. And right now, we're all trying to understand is, for associations, is who are our members and what kind of roles are they now playing in the worlds where they exist, and how those jobs have changed and how they have migrated. So just keeping a list of, maybe you can call them a random name or just keep the idea, but keeping certain characteristics can be very valuable to learn how the organization is kind of keeping pace with the time. Many of our science societies were men-only societies. When did the first women come in to those societies? When did they move into leadership positions? What story can we tell about how those societies and nonprofits changed to continue to be relevant?
And Gwen, when you were saying that made me start thinking about member journey mapping. We talked a little bit about personas. And so you kind of map their journey or their membership arc. I talk a lot in some of the work I do about career arcs, because I do compensation studies for association staff. So it's not just about the package that you're getting paid or compensated with. It's about, what's your career arc? So maybe you're in a mid-level position right now, but what's your career arc at this organization? How can we develop you and move you up? And you have to be thoughtful about that. And so that's an approach, of course, with membership experiences. What is that arc we're going to build? How can we analyze that arc? How can we understand where that member is. Because one of the, you mentioned earlier about all the different membership categories some of the groups have, and this because of the career arc of the trade association or the professional society. You know, those people, where are they? Are they a student? And they are notorious for not converting to full membership after the first year of being a student, but they come back eventually. But you know, where are they? Are they a student? Are they retired? Are they somewhere in between? If they're retired, how are they engaging and interacting with the organization? So there are just so many different things that we can find from looking at this data. We talk about data mining, we talk about data lakes, we talk about data warehouses, we talk about data rivers. I think it's really more of a data river right now. So I think, you know, let's close on that. I can't believe we've been talking this long already. It's been such a great conversation. So Daniel, let's start with you. What do you think? Is it a data river or a data lake?
Right now, unfortunately, I think it's still a data river, and I think it has been for the last 20 years. We've heard big data, big data, big data, and what that's led to is a culture of associations hoarding data and hoarding it with no real purpose. So, you know, in my closing thoughts, what I would leave you with is ask the question of why do we need this data? Is there a purpose behind why we're collecting this data? And if not, maybe we stop collecting it, or maybe we even go a step further and delete the data from our database. But data governance, it really starts with ownership and giving your employees the ownership to make those decisions around data and be part of the data conversation.
Wow, that's a great closing thought. I love that. Thank you. So Gwen, data lake, data river?
Oh, well, I think in thinking of hoarding, yeah, we're parking a lot of data in lakes because we haven't done exactly what Daniel has said. You know, what value? Oh, it might be valuable to us, so let's not get rid of it. I have some things in a closet that's exactly how I've approached it. I might need this at some point. And so what we need to do is ask our questions. What's the value of this? What is the value immediately? What is the value in our dashboarding to tell our core organizational stories? What might be valuable to us historically? And then only keep that which we're going to keep and protect it. Because one of the other risks is the more that we hoard, the more vulnerable we are that our data is going to escape us. So we should get rid of it if we don't need it.
Wow. Wow, such great closing thoughts from both of you. I love it. The other question I like to ask before we sign off is how can the audience get in touch with you if they'd like to follow up, learn more, or continue the conversation? So Daniel, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can go to our website, strategico-consultants.com.
Great. Thank you. And Gwen?
So I would say the same thing. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can contact me at Claremont Graduate University or at Gwen Garrison at High Sierra Insights. And if you can't find me there, contact Daniel, because we are in weekly contact as we are building out our capacity to help associations with this topic.
Oh, that's excellent. That is great to hear. I love to hear about people collaborating and working together and joining forces and becoming a more powerful team. So this has been a really fun conversation about data governance. It's actually a more fun topic than people might give it credit for. So I want to thank my guests, Daniel and Gwen, for joining me this week and discussing data governance, because I'm a data nerd. I love this stuff. So I'll always enjoy having these conversations. So we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next week with another exciting episode. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out our website, roguetulips.com. And if you're interested in nonprofit executive management education, Whether you're a current CAE, a CAE candidate, or just a curious sort like myself, check out our education program. It's got its own website. It's called the 501c League, and the website is the 501cleague.net. So thanks again, everyone. And on behalf of myself, Daniel, and Gwen, thanks for joining us. And we'll be back next time. Bye.